The shovel hit a rock again. Ezekiel Thornfield said some bad words under his breath. He wiped sweat from his old, weathered face as he looked down at the hole he was digging behind his little house. The hole was 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, just the right size for a man who had given up on everything. The morning sun was really hot on the empty Texas land, and he had been digging since the sun came up. He had planned it all out. He would finish digging the hole by noon, write a letter saying why his ranch should go to the bank, then use his father's old gun to end 37 years of being sad and lonely. No family would cry for him. No friends would miss him. He would just be another forgotten person in a place that hurt dreamers and left their bones behind. The long dry spell had killed all his cows. The bank said they would take his ranch away. His wife had died from a fever 2 winters ago, and their baby died with her. What was left for a man who had lost everything that mattered to him? Ezekiel threw another shovel full of dirt. Each time he hit the hard ground, it was like counting down to his last hour. But then he heard something, a sound that didn't belong in his world of quiet sadness. It was a woman's voice, weak and scared, calling from somewhere near his front gate. Ezekiel dropped his shovel and picked up his rifle. He thought it might be another trick from those men who wanted to steal his land. They had been circling around his place like hungry birds. He had made it clear he wouldn't sell his ranch, but desperate men do desperate things. As he walked around the corner of his little house, he saw her. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20 years old, had fallen down against his wooden gate. Her dress was torn and dirty. Her dark hair was messy with dust and sweat. But what made Ezekiel's heart jump was that she was going to have a baby, probably in about 8 months. She was barely awake. Her lips moved, but no sound came out as she tried to speak. One shaking hand was pressed against her big belly. There was blood on the bottom of her dress, and her face was as pale as moonlight in winter. This wasn't some trick or trap. This was a woman who was dying and needed help. And somehow she had found her way to the one man within 50 miles who had been planning to die. Ezekiel stood there, frozen, staring at this unexpected gift that had literally fallen at his doorstep. The same shovel he had been using to dig his own grave might now be needed to bury someone else. But first, he had to decide if he still had enough kindness left in him to try and save her. Ezekiel dropped his rifle and ran to the gate. His boots kicked up dust as he knelt down beside the woman who wasn't awake. Up close, he could see she was just a girl, younger than he first thought. She had gentle features that showed she had lived a nicer life than whatever brought her to his doorstep. Her breathing was very light, and when he put his hand on her forehead, her skin was burning hot with fever. He had seen enough sick people to know she was in really bad shape. But the baby, that was what worried him most. Her dress was wet with more than just sweat, and the dark stains told a story he didn't want to understand. Time was running out for both of them. Without thinking, Ezekiel picked her up in his arms. He was surprised by how light she felt, even though she was having a baby. As he carried her toward his house, she moved a little. Her eyes opened to show the bluest eyes he had ever seen. For a moment, they looked at his face, and her dry, cracked lips tried to say words. Her voice was barely a whisper, but he heard it clearly in the desert quiet. "Please," she said, "don't let my baby die." The words hit him like someone had punched him. Here was someone fighting to bring life into the world while he had been digging a hole to escape from it. He could see how strange this was as he pushed through his door and laid her gently on his bed, the same bed where he had planned to write his final letter. Ezekiel had helped horses and cows have babies, but never a human baby. His hands shook as he got water from his well and clean cloth from his wife's old sewing basket. The girl's eyes had closed again, but her breathing was still hard. And every few minutes her body would tense up with what he knew were the pains that come before a baby is born. As he started cleaning the dirt and blood from her face, he noticed something that made his blood feel cold. Around her wrist was a thin rope burn, and there were bruises on her arms that looked like finger marks. Someone had tied her up. Someone had hurt her, and somehow she had escaped and made it to his lonely ranch. But that meant whoever had done this to her might be looking for her. Ezekiel looked toward his windows. He suddenly realized that his faraway location, which had seemed perfect for ending his life in private, might now make him and this girl easy targets for whoever was hunting her. The girl's hand suddenly grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes opened wide with fear. "They're coming," she whispered urgently. "They said they'd find me no matter where I ran." Ezekiel's mind raced as he tried to understand her words. He had thought his biggest problem was deciding whether to live or die. But now he had a pregnant girl bleeding in his bed, and unknown bad guys possibly heading his way. The half-dug grave behind his house suddenly seemed like the least of his worries. He moved to his window and looked across the land, searching for dust clouds or movement that might mean riders were coming. The endless stretch of scrubland and small trees let him see for miles, but it also meant nowhere to hide if trouble came calling. His ranch sat in a low area surrounded by small hills that would give any attacker the higher ground. The girl's grip got tighter on his wrist, and when he turned back to her, he saw terror in those blue eyes. "My name is Celeste," she said, trying to sit up despite her condition. "My father, he sold me to a man named Virgil Blackwood. He said it was to pay money he owed from gambling. But Virgil, he's not right in the head." Ezekiel knew that name. Every rancher within 100 miles knew about Virgil Blackwood, a rich landowner who controlled most of the water rights in 3 counties. Rumors followed him like hungry birds, whispers about missing girls, and unmarked graves on his property. He was the kind of man who bought judges and sheriffs the way other men bought cattle. "I was locked in his house for 3 months, Celeste continued, her voice getting stronger as anger replaced fear. "He said the baby was his property, that he'd raise it to be just like him. But when I went into labor early, I stole a horse, and rode until it died under me, then walked the rest of the way." That explained the rope burns and bruises. It also explained why she had picked his ranch. It was the farthest place from Blackwood's territory, a place where a desperate woman might hope to find safety. But Ezekiel knew better. Men like Blackwood didn't give up their property easily, especially when that property was carrying his child. A sharp pain doubled Celeste over, and she cried out. Her water broke, soaking through the blankets onto his bed. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not. Ezekiel realized he was about to become responsible for 2 lives instead of ending one. He helped her lie back down, trying to remember everything his wife had told him about having babies during her pregnancy. But this felt different. Wrong. Somehow, there was too much blood, and Celeste's face was getting paler by the minute. Something was seriously wrong. As if his fears had called them, the sound of horse hooves reached his ears. Multiple horses riding hard toward his ranch. Ezekiel grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. His heart sank as he counted 6 riders coming over the nearest hill. They rode in a line like men with military training, and at their front was a figure he recognized from wanted posters. Tall, thin, with silver hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. Virgil Blackwood had come to collect his property, and he had brought enough men to make sure no one stood in his way. Ezekiel looked at Celeste. Her face was twisted with pain as another contraction ripped through her small body. Blood continued to soak into his bed, and he could see her strength fading with each difficult breath. She was dying, and her baby was dying with her, but she was still thinking about protecting an innocent child from becoming a monster. That's when something became clear in his mind. For months, he had been focused on his own pain, his own losses, his own reasons to give up. But this girl had every reason to quit. Sold by her father, hurt by Blackwood, hunted like an animal, and yet she was fighting for her child's future with her last breath. "I promise," he said, and meant it with every part of his being. "Your baby will be free." Blackwood's time was almost up. Ezekiel could hear the men moving around outside, probably getting ready to attack the house from different angles. His old military training kicked in as he thought about his choices. The house was strong, built from thick pine logs that would stop most bullets. But it only had 2 windows and 1 door. Easy to defend, but also easy to trap someone inside. Then, he remembered something that made his blood run cold. The grave he had been digging behind the house. In all the chaos of finding Celeste, he had left the shovel right there beside the half-finished hole. If Blackwood's men saw it, they would know exactly what he had been planning, and they would use that knowledge against him. "Time's up, Thornfield." Blackwood's voice boomed across the yard. "You made your choice." The first gunshot broke his front window, sending glass flying across the room. Celeste screamed, not from the gunfire, but from another contraction that seemed to tear through her entire body. Ezekiel dropped low and shot back. His shot took one of Blackwood's men from his horse. But as he reloaded, he heard Celeste gasp. When he looked back, he saw something that changed everything. The baby's head was showing, finally coming into position after hours of struggle, but Celeste was unconscious now. Her body going through the motions while her spirit fought to stay alive. More gunshots hit the house walls. Ezekiel was trapped between 2 impossible situations. If he left Celeste to fight off the attackers, she and the baby would die during delivery. But if he stayed to help with the birth, Blackwood's men would eventually break down the door and kill them all anyway. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this moment of violence and death. The thin, weak cry of a newborn baby fighting its way into a world that seemed determined to destroy it before it could take its first breath. The baby was alive. But Celeste lay perfectly still, her eyes closed and her breathing so light it was barely visible. Ezekiel realized with growing horror that he might have just watched the moment when this brave young woman gave her life to bring her child into the world. Outside, Blackwood's voice cut through the gunfire with deadly certainty. "I smell smoke, Thornfield. We're burning you out." The smell of burning wood proved Ezekiel's worst fears. Orange light flickered against the remaining window as flames began to lick at the sides of his house. Blackwood's men had torches, and they were setting fire to everything that would burn. Soon he would have to choose between burning alive or stepping outside to face 6 guns. But first, he had to deal with the miracle in front of him. The baby was small but breathing, its tiny lungs filling with air as it cried with surprising strength. Ezekiel had no experience with newborn babies, but he knew enough to clean the child's face and wrap it in one of his clean shirts. As he lifted the baby, he realized something that made his heart skip. It was a girl, just like her mother. Celeste's eyes opened one last time, focusing on her daughter with a clarity that didn't match her failing strength. She tried to speak, but only managed to whisper, "Rose," she breathed. "Her name is Rose." Then her eyes closed for the final time. And Ezekiel was alone with a newborn baby and a house that was quickly becoming a death trap. The flames were spreading faster than he had expected, and smoke was already making it hard to breathe. "Baby." Rose seemed to sense the danger, her cries becoming more urgent as the temperature in the room began to rise. Ezekiel wrapped the child more tightly and checked his ammunition. 3 bullets left in his rifle, 2 in his pistol. Not nearly enough to fight his way out against 6 men, but maybe enough to give baby Rose a chance. He thought about the promise he had made to Celeste, and suddenly the plan that formed in his mind seemed like the only option left. The back wall of the house was already catching fire, but there was still one way out. The Blackwood's men might not be watching the root cellar. It had a second entrance behind the house, hidden by an old water barrel. If he could get there without being seen, he might be able to circle around and catch them off guard. But that meant leaving Celeste's body in the burning house. And something about that felt like breaking his promise to everything she had fought. For this young woman had died protecting her child, and now her final resting place would be a fire lit by the man who had hurt her. As if reading his thoughts, baby Rose opened her eyes and looked directly at him. Those same blue eyes that had belonged to her mother, but already showing a strength that reminded him of Celeste's final moments. This child was all that remained of a brave woman's fight for freedom. And Ezekiel would be damned if he let Blackwood turn her into his property. He kissed Celeste's forehead one last time, whispering a prayer for her soul, then held baby Rose against his chest and moved toward the back of the house. The heat was becoming unbearable, and he could hear the roof beams starting to crack from the fire above. But as he reached for the door to the root cellar, he heard something that stopped him cold. Footsteps on the house's front porch, and Blackwood's voice, much closer now, and filled with anticipation. "Don't worry, my dear," the silver-haired man said, apparently talking to someone he thought was still alive inside. "Papa's here to take you and the baby home where you belong. We'll put this unfortunate rebellion behind us and focus on raising my heir properly." Blackwood thought Celeste was still alive, which meant he was about to walk into a burning house, expecting to find a helpless woman and newborn waiting for rescue. Ezekiel realized this might be his only chance to end this nightmare once and for all, but it would mean using baby Rose as bait in the most dangerous gamble of his life. Ezekiel made a decision that went against every protective instinct screaming in his head. He positioned himself behind the door, holding baby Rose close to muffle her cries, and waited. The front door creaked open, and he heard Blackwood's boots on the wooden floor, confident and unhurried. "Celeste, darling," Blackwood called out, his voice sickeningly gentle. "I know you're frightened, but this foolishness ends now. Where's my baby?" The silver-haired man moved deeper into the burning house, apparently unbothered by the smoke and flames. Ezekiel could see his shadow through the doorway, tall and predatory, searching for his prey. This was a man so arrogant he had walked into a death trap, believing himself untouchable. When Blackwood finally saw Celeste's still form on the blood-soaked bed, his reaction wasn't grief or shock, it was rage. "You stupid girl," he snarled. "You'd rather die than live as my wife. Fine. But my child better be alive, or I'll burn down every ranch from here to Mexico until I find who helped you." That's when Ezekiel stepped out from behind the door, his rifle trained on Blackwood's chest. The older man spun around, his hand moving toward his pistol, but froze when he saw the bundle in Ezekiel's arms. Your child is safe, Ezekiel said quietly. But she's not your property. She's a free American citizen, born on free soil. Blackwood's cold eyes fixed on baby Rose, and Ezekiel saw something inhuman flicker across his face. This wasn't a man, looking at his own child. This was a predator, calculating the value of his prize. Give me the baby, Thornfield, and I might let you walk away from this, Blackwood said. Keep her, and I'll make sure you die slower than you can imagine. But Ezekiel had already made his choice. The same resolve that had carried him through the war, through his wife's death, through months of despair, now crystallized into something unbreakable. He thought about Celeste's final words, about the promise he had made, about the half-dug grave behind his house that suddenly seemed like a symbol of his old life. Ending and something new beginning. The only thing walking away from here, Ezekiel said, is this child, to a place where she'd grow up free. Blackwood's hand moved toward his gun, but the burning roof beam above chose that moment to give way. It crashed down between them, in an explosion of sparks and flame, separating the two men, but also blocking Ezekiel's shot. Through the smoke and fire, he heard Blackwood cursing and scrambling toward the door. Ezekiel ran for the root cellar, baby Rose crying against his chest. As the house began to collapse around them, he could hear Blackwood shouting orders to his men outside, reorganizing for a final assault. But when Ezekiel emerged from the hidden cellar entrance behind the house, he found something that gave him hope for the first time in months. 3 of Blackwood's men lay unconscious near their horses, and a 4th was tied up with his own rope. Standing over them, smoking a cigarette with casual confidence, was a woman. Ezekiel recognized Deputy Marshal Kate Sullivan, the only law enforcement officer in the territory who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Afternoon, Ezekiel, she said with a slight smile. Heard there might be some trouble out your way. Kate Sullivan had been tracking Blackwood for 3 months, following a trail of missing women and forged legal documents across 2 territories. When she had seen the smoke from Ezekiel's house, she had known she had finally found her target. What she hadn't expected was to arrive in time to witness a man willing to die for a child that wasn't even his. Celeste got word before she escaped, Kate explained as she helped Ezekiel move away from the burning house. Left a message with a sympathetic kitchen girl who got it to me. Been riding hard for 2 days to get here. Behind them, the house collapsed completely, sending a pillar of smoke into the desert sky. Blackwood emerged from the wreckage, his expensive clothes singed and his silver hair disheveled, but his eyes still burning with the same cold fury. When he saw Kate's badge, his expression shifted from rage to calculation. Marshal Sullivan, he said smoothly, straightening his jacket. Perfect timing. This man has kidnapped my legally adopted daughter and her child. I have the papers right here. Kate didn't even glance at the documents Blackwood pulled from his coat. Those papers were signed under duress by a father who owed you money. I've got 3 witnesses who'll testify to that, including the girl who died in that fire trying to escape from you. Blackwood's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the monster underneath. You can't prove anything. My word against a dead girl's. Don't need her word, Kate replied. Got yours. You just admitted she was running from you. That makes this kidnapping, false imprisonment, and now murder. For the first time, Ezekiel saw fear flicker across Blackwood's face. The man who had terrorized half the territory was finally facing consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. But cornered animals were the most dangerous. And Ezekiel instinctively stepped between Blackwood and baby Rose. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then Blackwood made his move, drawing his pistol with surprising speed for a man his age. But Kate had been ready for this moment for months, and her shot took him center mass before he could clear leather dot. Virgil Blackwood crumpled to the ground, his reign of terror ending in the dust of a poor rancher's yard. As he lay dying, his eyes fixed on baby Rose one last time, and Ezekiel saw something that might have been regret flicker across his features before the light faded completely. In the sudden silence that followed, baby Rose stopped crying and opened her blue eyes, looking up at the 3 adults who now stood guard over her future. Kate smiled down at the child, then looked at Ezekiel with something like respect. So what now? She asked. This little one needs a home, and last I heard, you were planning to leave this world permanently. Ezekiel looked down at Rose, thinking about the promise he had made to her mother and the grave he had started digging that morning. It seemed Like a lifetime ago that he had been ready to give up on everything. Now he was holding the most precious thing in the world, a chance to honor a brave woman's sacrifice and raise her daughter to be everything Celeste had dreamed she could be. That grave behind the house, he said quietly. I think I'll finish digging it, but not for me. Celeste deserves a proper burial, somewhere peaceful where her daughter can visit when she's older. Kate nodded approvingly. And after that, Ezekiel looked out at his drought-stricken land, his ramshackle buildings, his uncertain future. 6 hours ago, it had all seemed worthless. Now it looked like the perfect place to raise a little girl, who would grow up knowing that freedom was worth fighting for, that good people sometimes appeared when you needed them most, and that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for something beautiful to be born. After that, he said, adjusting baby Rose in his arms as she yawned and settled against his chest. We start building a life worth living. The sun was setting over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in that vast landscape, other stories were unfolding. Other lives were hanging in the balance. Other choices between hope and despair were being made. But here, in this moment, a broken man had found purpose. An innocent child had found safety. And justice had finally caught up with evil. As Kate helped him gather supplies for the journey to town, where Rose would need proper medical care, and he would need to start the legal process of adoption, Ezekiel realized something profound. The same shovel he had used to dig what he thought would be his grave had instead helped him bury his old life and uncover something infinitely more valuable, the chance to be the father his own father had never been, to a daughter who would never know the man who had tried to claim her, but would grow up knowing the man who had chosen to save her.